Here is a fact that runs backwards from what you'd expect. For most of human history, infectious disease was not the biggest killer, not because ancient humans were healthy by our standards. They weren't. But for tens of thousands of years, small groups of people, spread thin across enormous landscapes, moving constantly from place to place, were, without knowing it, protected by something. Distance. A disease cannot become an epidemic if it runs out of people to infect. And then, in a narrow window of time, that protection disappeared, and nobody understood why people around them were suddenly dying in a completely new way. Here is how we know this now. In July 2025, a team led by geneticist Eske Willerslev published the largest study of its kind ever conducted. DNA extracted from the teeth and bones of over 1,300 prehistoric people, spanning 37,000 years of human history across Eurasia. They found genetic traces of 214 different pathogens, and the pattern in the data was not random. For tens of thousands of years, almost nothing. Then, starting around 6,500 years ago, disease after disease begins appearing in the bones, rising sharply, spreading fast. Something changed, and it changed everywhere at once. Here is the first reason ancient humans were protected. Before that point, a hunter-gatherer band was small, usually under 150 people, and it moved. For a disease to become a true epidemic, it needs a certain density of hosts within reach of each other. A small band constantly relocating, with long stretches of empty land between it and the next group, was, accidentally, running one of the most effective epidemic containment strategies possible. If someone got sick, the disease had almost nowhere to go. It would burn through a handful of people and then hit a wall of distance it could not cross. This was not medicine. This was not knowledge. This was geography doing the job that we now do with quarantine and vaccination. And then agriculture happened. Here is what changed everything. People stopped moving. They built permanent settlements. They lived in close fixed proximity to each other for the first time in the history of the species, and they brought animals to live with them. Sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, domesticated somewhere around 6,500 years ago, exactly the point where the Willerslev study shows disease beginning its sharp rise. This was not a coincidence. Living in daily contact with animal waste, animal blood, animal breath for the first time ever created a bridge. A pathogen that had spent its entire existence cycling quietly through livestock suddenly had a new host available, one that lived right next to it every day for years at a time. The diseases did not evolve to attack humans. Humans built the conditions that let them cross over. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The same study found the oldest known genetic trace of the plague bacterium, Yersinia pestis, in a sample roughly 5,000 years old. Other research on ancient plague genomes shows something stranger still. The earliest strains circulating in human populations 5,000 years ago were missing a key genetic feature. They could not yet survive inside fleas, which means the version of plague that killed people in the Bronze Age did not travel the way the Black Death did thousands of years later. No rat, no flea, no dramatic swelling buboes. It is likely that early plague spread directly between people through the air, coughed from one person to the next. That adaptation for flea-borne transmission, the version everyone associates with the word plague, only evolved more than 1,000 years after the disease was already killing people. For over 1,000 years, plague existed among humans in a form nobody today would even recognize as plague, and the people living through it had absolutely no framework for what was happening to them. Here is a second disease that leaves proof you can still hold in your hands. Tuberculosis does something no other ancient infection does quite as visibly. It attacks the spine. Vertebrae collapse inward. The back curves. Archaeologists call it Pott's disease, and it has been identified in skeletons from Neolithic Europe dating back roughly 7,000 years. A teenager and a woman from northern Italy, a man from Hungary, remains later confirmed by testing for the bacterium's DNA directly. Picture what that looked like from the outside, with none of the science we now have. A person otherwise healthy, slowly bending, wasting. In pain for months, sometimes years, with no visible wound, no injury, no attacker, just a slow collapse from the inside, for reasons nobody in that group had any way of identifying. Here is the uncomfortable center of this entire video. Germ theory, the basic idea that invisible organisms cause disease, is not an ancient idea. It is barely 150 years old. For every single year before that, across every culture on every continent, when someone began wasting away for no visible reason, there was no concept of a bacterium, no concept of a virus, No word for any of it. There was only a person getting sicker in front of people who loved them, with absolutely nothing to point to as the cause. No wound, no enemy, no animal attack, just decline. And when a species that survives by explaining things has no explanation, it does not stay empty for long. The gap gets filled. A curse, an angry ancestor, a broken taboo, a spirit that has taken hold not because ancient humans were foolish, because watching someone die of something invisible with no name and no cause is one of the most frightening experiences a human group can have. And an explanation, even a wrong one, was less frightening than no explanation at all. Here is where it gets even harder to sit with. Once agriculture created dense, settled populations, disease did not just increase. It became permanent. Smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, plague. Nearly all of the diseases historians call crowd diseases. The ones capable of tearing through an entire settlement trace back to a livestock version of the same illness, adapted to a new host. Cattle gave humans tuberculosis and measles. Once a settlement reached a certain size, these diseases stopped needing to reintroduce themselves from animals at all. They could now survive indefinitely, pass directly from person to person, inside a population that never stopped being large enough to sustain them. The band that used to outrun disease by staying small and moving constantly no longer existed. The village that replaced it could not outrun anything. Here is the uncomfortable conclusion. You live with germ theory. You know, when someone gets sick, roughly what is happening inside them. Even if you couldn't explain the biology yourself, that knowledge is not something you worked out. It is something you inherited from a discovery that is younger than your own great-great-grandparents. For every generation of humans before that discovery, watching someone waste away meant watching something with no name, no visible cause, and no answer, and still needing, somehow, to explain it to the people standing next to you. The fear you would have felt was not a lack of intelligence. It was the correct response to a universe that, for almost all of human history, offered no explanation at all. The thumbnail for this video shows someone lying still, a single small mark visible on their chest, and two people standing beside them, watching, unable to do anything. Nobody in that image is going to be told what is wrong. Nobody in that image has the word for it, which is one way to put it.